My name's Ila Kerchenski, and I am a social work major at Ohio State in my last year here. And I also minored in women's gender and sexuality studies. And I am really interested in working in the sexual health field. And so I'm interested in doing things like sex education and stuff like that, and advocacy for sexual health stuff. I've always known that I wanted to connect with people, help people in some way. And eventually when I found social work, and I learned that it was kind of more than just child protective services and therapy. It's a lot more than that. I became really interested in it. I'm interning at a children's hospital in Columbus, doing more community outreach stuff with them. So not in a medical setting, but more so I travel between different schools in the area and do health education lessons with them. So it's a lot of sex ed stuff. It is puberty education I've done a whole lot of, as well as some random healthy relationship, online safety stuff. I think that being a queer and trans person and going into sex ed and sexual health is really important. It just has been really meaningful within my internship. I have gotten to connect with queer kids in that. I don't know, you can go in and teach every day, but getting that feedback from the kids is so meaningful. And even just hearing the questions that they ask and stuff that are related to queer identities is okay, it just reassures me that this is really, really meaningful stuff, because somebody needs to hear that XYZ that they're feeling or experiencing is okay. And I'm able to be in there as a queer and trans person and be me too, or be yes, that's totally, just to be able to normalize and all of those things. And I think that's a really powerful thing. I definitely came into my own identity later and very much on my own. Growing up, my education that I received definitely wasn't good. It was just didn't address those identities. It would have been nice to have had some of this information formatted to me in a way that was that this is that being queer or queerness is even an option. It just was completely not acknowledged. And in my experience, I think we talked about just pregnancy and STIs and stuff like that, but there was never any acknowledgement that gay sex is a thing, or that queer identity, even just as an identity about yourself unrelated to sexual health, none of that was really talked about. And so I think that I unknowingly definitely constructed this version of this is what's normal, which made that process of figuring out my own identity honestly really hard, despite having parents and people in my life who were really accepting, because it was never presented to me in an educational setting as a valid option. My immediate thing, knowing that that isn't really true, was just oh, I'm not normal, which I don't know, is a crazy thing to experience when nobody directly said that to me, but because it was never presented as an option. So I just feel really glad that I get to present that as a valid option to kids, and I think that's really important. When it comes to parents and pushback with sex ed and sex ed with their kids and youth, I would say that the main thing that we've been seeing is related to recent policy changes within the past couple of years that basically makes sex ed, anything that goes beyond abstinence-only sex ed, requires a permission slip from parents. And so we see that being an access issue, whether that's because parents blatantly don't support it, or because it's just a barrier and parents are allowed to disagree with their kids getting that education. And if there are parents who are disagreeing with it, those are probably the same parents who aren't providing it at home either. So there's a lot of things that those kids don't get to learn about their bodies or about what's normal or healthy. And that's why policy advocacy is really important too. The thing that I see the most is barriers regarding teachers in classrooms. And that can be difficult because it feels with teachers, I'm also a teacher. And so it we're on the same team here. But a lot of times people, have their own things about talking about sex, especially to kids. People get really protective of kids, understandably so. But of course the data shows us that being armed with that knowledge leads to better health outcomes and decisions. But with teachers, I've seen in the past, I will go into the classroom and it may be like clear that they don't want me there, they don't agree with it. Sometimes teachers interject with like things that they want to say to their classroom. For example, like I've had a teacher just be like, say to the students, I don't like talking about this. This makes me uncomfortable. I don't like talking about this. Nobody likes talking about this. It's uncomfortable and awkward. And while it's important to acknowledge that like it can make us feel uncomfortable, especially in those teenage years, teachers really can at times drive that home in a way of like making the kids feel like they should feel uncomfortable, or like there's something wrong with asking questions about their bodies, when our job is to come in and tell them that like we're not fazed by those questions. We want you to ask us those questions so that you're getting science-based accurate information, because if they're not getting that at all, they're going to like a random place on the internet. And so I have just seen teachers instill shame a little bit sometimes. You see in those classrooms, the students ask less questions, they're just quiet and they just listen, and that's okay, but you can tell when students aren't asking questions because of the environment that they're in. I would say that it's just like kind of an ignored realm of social work. I think that like sexuality in general, societally, is like a very taboo topic. People like to say that it's a personal thing that is individual to people so they can just figure it out by themselves. But we see that that's not like the way that it works. Like sexuality is like inherently about like connection with people, and there's no reason for us to not talk about it. And people get really scared of a topic that is supposed to be about like pleasure and connection and stuff. And so I think that like within social work, we could do a lot better of a job of including that in curriculums for existing like classes, coursework. We should be acknowledging that. We see in the data that like at medical appointments and things like that, if doctors or like social workers, if they don't bring up sexuality or sexual health, that person is not comfortable bringing it up, so they won't. And then those issues, those health issues, those stigmas, they don't get addressed. And so we need like professionals in social work to like destigmatize that, to be willing to ask those questions that feel uncomfortable to people. We need like just to societally to be more aware of that. And social work, I feel, is a big part of a lot of like cultural progress and a lot of things, and that needs to be a part of it more than it is. Social workers have like written within our code of ethics this responsibility to advocate for social justice. We're upholding that, to uphold our license and to have an ethical practice. And so I think it's so cool that I am like in classes right now with people who will be working in criminal justice and in like individual therapy, and who will be working with foster kids, and who will be working like in all these different ways, because we're addressing like such a wide range of like populations within society and social problems in society and stuff. So being able to all have that social justice background is really important, and that's why I value social work a lot. I would say my most meaningful experience was I taught a lesson at a high school on sex ed and like condom use, condom negotiation, like all of the typical sex ed things. And after the lesson, I had a student come up to me and just asked to talk to me like in private and stuff. And so I like go to the other side of the room with this student, and he basically just like tells me like I'm transgender, I'm a guy. And so it just felt like this kind of like permission, like him kind of being like, is that okay? And it just was so meaningful to be able to like be in that room also as a trans person, and to know that like that he had that comfort level and was able to see something in me teaching that day that felt safe to ask that question, and to just be like, is that okay? Like, what does this stuff mean for me? Does this lesson that you were just teaching apply to me? All of these things. I just got to be like, I'm trans too. And like, just be like, yeah, just be there for him in that way. And he, like, you could just see kind of like this relief. And it was really awesome, because that's not something that I would have really had the opportunity to do in a school setting as a student. Like, I wouldn't have had the opportunity, I wouldn't have even known to express that. Like, these kids are so smart and so like in tune with themselves and their queerness in a way that I like wasn't able to be or didn't have the knowledge to be. And so it's really cool to get to talk to those kids and like affirm that for them. And yeah, that was really awesome. They just feel really comfortable saying all these random things to you. And it like that level of comfort that we see, even in like anonymous questions, seeing the questions that they ask really reaffirms that they need this education and that like it means something to them. Social work is really important, not because we're experts of anybody's lives, but because we're very much the opposite of that in some ways. We are trained and like have this background of listening and hearing people's problems. So social work isn't really any one thing. It's the ability to listen to people and just work with them and just be like, okay, we're going to make a plan, or we're going to be here for you and we're going to offer this resource that you're asking us for. We have this thing that we say that's just like the client is the expert of their own lives. And that is just like, that's why social work is so important, because it's about just addressing people's needs that they're already asking for. So if people are having other ideas about what social work is or thinking it's not valuable, I just would refute that, because simply like it's meeting a need that somebody's already asking for. And so if we're able to do that, I think that like we can make a lot of progress.